the Bigsby B7. The tremolo that climbed into all of our hearts on the front of many a Gibson Les Paul, a Gibson 335, and so many other guitars. Here we're going to talk about the B7, American-made one, and its Korean B70 and Chinese B700 compatriots in the Bigsby line. Stay tuned. Hi boys and girls, I'm Nick in the States, and on this fraudulent Les Paul that I'm carrying right now, it has the classic, the real deal, the original Bigsby B7. Now the B7 was introduced 10,000 years ago, actually sometime I think in the late 50s, and came as an option on Gibson guitars. Mainly you saw them in the customs back in the day, but quite a few standards over the years had a B7 put on it. Now in the modern days we have a B7, we have a B70 from Korea, and a B700 from China. And what I want to do in this video is just highlight some of the differences from one to the next. Give you some pros and cons, and then give you some final thoughts at the end. So hopefully this is useful for you. Now we're going to start with this one because this is the made in the USA, real deal B7. This actually uses a sand cast aluminum construction where they actually make a new sand cast every time they pour one of these in the US. I think they're made in Kalamazoo, Michigan, of all places. Easy thing to notice on an American USA B7 is the fact that you see the Bigsby, and it's a flatter version of the Bigsby logo, and it has the patent number on the face. Sometimes that patent number is painted black, sometimes it's left like this with relief polished, and sometimes there are no black in this whole section at all. But that's how one of the easy tells to do that. Now another part about this is this roller guy right here. When you go and move the strings, what's happening is the string is moving underneath this. And this rod right here actually uses roller bearings inside. So that way it's nice and smooth, super low rolling friction, so that when you strum, the lower amount of friction you have, the more likely the guitar is going to return exactly to tune. You can imagine if that had more friction, it'll go close to coming all the way back to tune, but maybe be a bit flat. And that happens, some of the other Bigsbys we'll show you in a bit. But that's one of the biggest design differences in the USA one. Now as we go to pros and cons, pros on this one, well, this is the real deal original made in the USA. That's a big deal. Second, this is the only one that's compatible with a Vibramate. And a Vibramate allows you to mount or remove one of these on a guitar without putting any actual screw holes in the guitar. Now I'll show you quickly. On my Les Paul Custom, you can actually see this is screwed to a plate. And that plate is actually screwed into the stop tail pieces. And the only thing holding on is the strap pin. And these are screwed into those, which that plate is then screwed into the top. That's a Vibramate. You can kind of see it popping out right there, and it's underneath right here as well. This means I can return this mid-70s Gibson Les Paul Custom back to its original stop tail with no harm, no foul to the body, and not, affecting its resaleability. Now, because of that, the roller bearings, those needle bearings that are in here, this also means that this guitar is probably the smoothest action Bigsby. Very nice, very tasty. I like these because it's a mellower, it's not like crazy dive bombs, it's not made for that kind of stuff, and it feels like it's just easier and gentler than getting into a trem. So that's why I prefer these. That's the Bigsby B7. Now the con to the B7 is it's expensive. I think new one of these is about $150 to $170. If you hunt and you're patient, you can pick up a B7 in nickel for around $100, $119, $105. For a while when I was really in a Bigsby kick, anytime I saw one under $100, I bought it and put it in the case. And the cool thing is they've been made like this forever. So there are a bunch of them out there, and you can kind of hunt and kind of buy them. Next, we're going to move on to its Korean counterpart. This is a 1962 Gibson ES-125 TDC, and this has a Korean, the B70 on it, which honestly, really grinds my gears. This was dropped off with a luthier. This was Uncle Funky's guitar. I dropped it off at his luthier to have a Bigsby put on it. And at the time, the luthier wasn't very hip to one Bigsby for the other. Missed this video, maybe. And so he got the cheap Korean one. And to put that on this is sad. Wrong. But the screw holes would be in different places. If you put a different one on, it'd add more holes in it. And it stayed to this day. Now this is a Bigsby B70. It's made in Korea. Unlike the USA model, which is sand cast, this is die cast, so they can use the same die over and over again. It's a more efficient means of production. It's still made out of aluminum like the B7, which is great. So from a light perspective, lightness and kind of metallurgical qualities, it's very much similar to it. Likewise, the arm feels very much the same as a USA one. It's so smooth. They've rounded the front and the back. It has a little rubber, fuzzy pad on the end of it. Those things are all sort of the same. The difference is in the roller bar here, there's actually a nylon bearing in there instead of those needle bearings, and therefore it has a little bit more resistance and can be prone to not always returning right back to tune after you. The strings are usually in relative tune, but they may be just flat or pitchy, sharp. Now another identifying trait on these, if you look at it, they say Bigsby, and then right underneath it in small letters they say licensed. In addition, you won't see the patent number on the face of any of these. I've never seen a licensed one that has the patent number listed. So for pros, this is slightly less expensive than the USA ones, although not nearly as much as you'd think. And it's also made out of aluminum. So it's still the proper construction, even though they use a different die to cast, a different method. Doesn't seem like that's a tone affecting thing. But those are two pros. For cons, it's not that much cheaper. When I went and looked and hunted for these, I tend to find these at about $100, 90 at the cheapest. And you can usually find a USA one for 10 or 15 bucks cheaper if you're just patient, look on eBay for a few weeks, or buy a new for $1.50 versus $1.19, $1.70, somewhere in that range. You'll see it. It's not that much cheaper. And the other negative, of course, is having that roller, using the nylon kind of bearing material. It's just not quite as smooth. It's a little bit stiffer. Finally, and the huge one here is this will not mount to a vibramate. You're putting holes in your guitar if you can do a B70, whereas if you have a B7, you can use a vibramate and then have the option of putting it on and taking it off with no harm, no foul, no damage done. Now finally, we have the B700, or basically any Chinese copy of a Bigsby. You'll see these come on Epiphones with the Epiphone logo on them. You'll see them come on just numerous guitars, or unlabeled. Often the B700, it's a sticker that says Bigsby licensed on it, or just Bigsby. You'll obviously never see the patent number. You always have this little extra kind of V-ish thing pressed into the fitting there. So the thing on top, sometimes it'll say Bigsby here, sometimes it says Bigsby here. These are made out of hot metal, not aluminum. So cheap metal that's just been chromed, so they're heavier, they're a little rougher around the edges. Similarly, they have nylon bearing in the roller, so that's not nearly as good. And the bars, while pretty looking from the front, are quite sharp and rough all around the edges to the touch. So these are all made in China, pretty much. Now, for pros for these is they're cheap. If you've got a super cheap Les Paul guitar, you want to put one of these on, or if you're speccing a guitar, these are what often come on like China shipped guitars, and some of the less expensive guitars that'll come out for $200 or $300 will have one of these on it. But you can hunt on eBay and buy one of these for about $35, which is super cheap. Also, they sometimes have these in colors like black that it's very difficult to find the B70s or the B7s in. And if you're blacking out murdering metal, evil death, yes, Satan strong, blacking out your guitar with all black hardware, this may be one of the few options that you have. Did I mention they were cheap? $35. $35, that's nothing. It's amazing. But why? Well, those are the cons. They're a whole lot heavier. They're pot metal. They're also soft metal. It's just not as durable, nice of a setup construction. Likewise, the inside of that bar just feels awful. I do not enjoy that. It's just not so cool. They also won't fit a Vibromate, just like the B70 will not work that way. So you're putting holes in the top of your guitar, having it shipped already with holes in it. And finally, that vinyl, even more than the B70s, these definitely seem to have some return to tuning at exact pitch problems. Where I've had other guitars on it, and it would always be just, you know, 15 cents or however much off when it came back, and then you'd touch it and pull back a little bit, and then it was perfectly in tune, and pull back a little more, and then it was slightly out of tune again, and it would just rest at these places in the neighborhood of tune. The strings would all be relatively in tune, but overall, you weren't in tune to anyone else you're playing with. But that's the B700 or any Chinese kind of copy. So there you go, B7, B70, B700. Some of the same rules applies to a B5, a B50, and a B500. And those will kind of give you the relative options, very much the same sort of things. Good guitars that B7s go on often are 335 style guitars. Slim line, hollow body, single cutaway stuff like a Gibson ES-135 or the 125 that we showed, or some of the Ibanez Art Core series are great ones to put Bigsby's on. And of course, Les Pauls, right? Les Pauls, your single cuts, these kind of things. They'll never fit on a Tele because they're too long. They'd hang off the back of the guitar. They'll never fit on a Strat. It's possible to fit one on an SG, but it's really tight, and really the horseshoe is a better way of doing it, or using a B3 and a Towner Den tension bar. But with all of that, it's Bigsby land. It's Wham-a-lamma, and we're going to wrap this up with that. I've been Nick in the States. Yes, folks, I have issues. It's been a pleasure sharing them with you today. Take care.